friends, welcome to our channel. We are glad to see everyone who follows current events with us. Today's briefing features breaking news from several fronts: the military situation in Ukraine, an unexpected change of power in Hungary, a dangerous escalation around the Strait of Hormuz, and a diplomatic scandal between Turkey and Israel. Let's begin. The Frontline Situation, Sumy Direction. A tense operational situation is unfolding in the Sumy direction. Reports indicate a significant advancement of Russian troops toward Novodmitrivka. By current standards, this is one of the most tangible territorial gains in recent times. Previously, this settlement was mentioned only as an area of active combat. However, objective control materials, visual confirmation, have now emerged, confirming the advance. Combined with the recent establishment of control over Pokrovka, we can speak of the formation of an expanding wedge toward Krasnopilya. The terrain provides certain tactical advantages for the advancing forces. An abundance of ravines, gullies, and forests allows small infantry groups to move with a relatively low detection rate, although these same conditions pose a serious obstacle for heavy machinery. In an airspace saturated with drones, the stealth of personnel becomes paramount. At the same time, since the offensive is being conducted by small tactical groups, it is too early to speak of a full-scale and stable consolidation over a wide sector of the front. The prospect of an immediate storming of Krasnopilya itself remains distant. This relatively large urban-type settlement is located on the outskirts of Sumy and possesses the capacity for accumulating and housing reserve forces. To the north, Russian assault groups have closed in on Khapovshchina, advancing from Yunakovka and Yablonovka. Intensive meeting engagements are unfolding in the area of Malaya Korchakovka and Korchakovka, with Russian units operating actively in the forest belts near Korchakovka, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and Krasny Lyman directions. On the Siversk sector of the front, the Russian military is actively employing the tactic of wide flanking maneuvers. The Russian army is reaching the watershed ridge between the Bakhmutka and Kazeny Torets rivers, wedging into the Ukrainian defensive zone on the Mykolaiivka, Ry-Oleksandrivka line. In the Krasny Lyman sector, battles are gradually shifting to the southern part of the city. Russian troops have managed to close an operational pocket to the east of the settlement and expand their control zone in the northern sector. Combat operations also continue in the vicinity of Drobyshevo and Yarova. Operational analysis, preparation for the spring-summer campaign. The overall dynamics on the front increasingly suggest that the Russian army has entered a phase of purposeful preparation for a spring-summer offensive campaign. The current activity resembles a warm-up before large-scale events rather than independent strategic operations. A number of military analysts are inclined to believe that these are not disjointed situational attacks, but a systemic, sequentially built preparation for the next stage of the war. Planned personnel rotations, unit replacements, and the build-up of reserves while maintaining pressure across the entire line of contact are classic signs of the pre-launch phase of an active offensive. The key variable remains the seasonal factor. With the end of the Rasputitsa, mud season, and the emergence of foliage, the so-called Zelenka, the logic of combat undergoes fundamental changes. Dry ground opens opportunities for heavy equipment maneuvers off-road, while dense vegetation significantly reduces the effectiveness of reconnaissance and FPV drone strikes. Collectively, this expands the space for offensive operations and complicates defense for Ukrainian forces. Against this backdrop, current Russian attacks appear to be an effort to occupy the most advantageous starting positions before the main campaign begins, effectively leveling the front line for future operations rather than aiming for a full strategic breakthrough. Regarding likely priority directions, the most logical appear to be the Donbass, the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration, and the southern vector, including Zaporizhzhia. It is here that the combination of logistics, geography, and frontline configuration creates the greatest potential for an offensive. Other scenarios, including deep breakthroughs toward the Dnieper, remain less predictable and largely depend on the stability of the Ukrainian defense, which faces growing questions in several sectors, especially considering that previous local counterattacks at the junction of the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions cost the AFU significant losses. Hungary, a change of power, the end of the Orbán era. Parliamentary elections were held in Hungary with a record turnout of 77.8%. Compared to the 2022 elections, turnout increased by about 5.5% in the capital and roughly 7.6% nationwide. A particularly notable increase was recorded in the provinces. In regions bordering Ukraine, traditionally part of Orbán's electoral base, turnout rose by approximately 7.2%. In 2022, the Fidesz party won over 60% of the party list vote here. Historically, high regional turnout always favored the incumbent prime minister, but this time the pattern did not hold. Around midnight, Viktor Orbán conceded defeat. The election results, though not final, are clear and understandable. The responsibility and opportunity to govern the country have not been given to us. I have congratulated the winning party, he stated, adding that Fidesz would continue its political activities as an opposition party. According to the count of about 60% of the votes, the TISA party maintained a constitutional two-thirds majority, 136 seats in parliament. According to several observers, including analyst Dudakov, Orbán's defeat reflects a broader Trump effect, increasingly seen in European electoral campaigns. Washington's closest ally in Europe lost power despite public support from both Trump himself and Vice President J.D. Vance, who visited Budapest. This demonstrative support from the American right turned into what commentators bitingly called a kiss of death. Trump's policies enjoy extremely low popularity among the European electorate, and his current confrontation with Iran has triggered a full-scale energy crisis within the EU. In the medium term, this creates fertile ground for the growth of far-left and radical political forces in Europe capable of gaining political capital from anti-American sentiment. The Iran crisis. Deadlocked negotiations and maritime incidents. The American fleet found itself in extremely dangerous proximity to a direct military clash with Iran. According to some reports, there was a real threat of losing 2 destroyers at once. The positions of the parties in negotiations are so fundamentally divergent that predicting a productive outcome is impossible. Theoretically, mutual inflation of initial demands, followed by a gradual narrowing of gaps, is standard negotiation practice. However, the current US-Iranian standoff goes beyond standard scenarios. Finding a formula where both sides can publicly declare victory is extremely difficult. According to reports, the American side followed a traditional scheme, first offering the unfreezing of $6 billion assets as an incentive, then presenting conditions. The very ones Washington failed to achieve through military means. Essentially, the demand was to reopen the Strait of Hormuz in a short time frame. Iran, in turn, views control of the strait as a guarantee for receiving reparations and ensuring long-term peace, a deterrent in case of renewed aggression from Israel or the US. The White House offered a compromise in the form of joint patrols, but the value of such a format for the Iranian side is seen as zero. This deadlocked divergence of positions was noted by the US Vice President following the talks. Meanwhile, during the negotiations themselves, the US Navy apparently attempted to use its favorite tactic of coercive pressure. While discussions were ongoing in Islamabad, 2 American destroyers began moving toward the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranian side immediately detected the maneuver and warned through Pakistani mediators. If the ships did not change course, they would be struck within 30 minutes. The Americans, likely testing the seriousness of the threat, continued moving. Iran immediately launched strike drones. As soon as the attack was signaled, the American ships turned back, and Iran recalled the UAVs before they reached their engagement range. Following this, Donald Trump, in his characteristically blunt manner, announced a blockade of Iranian trade, promising to intercept any vessel in the open sea that had paid the Iranian transit fee. What such a step threatens for global financial markets is a rhetorical question, the answer to which became obvious in the following trading sessions. Simultaneously, Trump stated that he could destroy Iran in 1 day, even 1 hour, and expressed a categorical refusal to accept partial agreements. I don't want 90%. I don't want 95%. I want it all. Additionally, the president expressed deep disappointment with NATO's refusal to support American actions in the Strait. According to available data, the tension at the negotiations reached a breaking point. Turkish journalist Setin reported that Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi and American negotiator Witkoff nearly came to physical blows over sharp disagreements regarding the management of the Strait of Hormuz. Western analysts point out significant limitations to American pressure. Resuming full-scale hostilities against Iran is not only highly unpopular domestically, but also risks a sharp spike in oil and gasoline prices, acute shortages of chemical fertilizers and helium, a global market crash, and a new wave of inflation, all things that would most heavily damage Trump's own domestic political standing. Erdogan versus Netanyahu, the president of Turkey, launched a harsh critique against Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu personally. Erdogan called the initiative to introduce the death penalty exclusively for Palestinian prisoners unthinkable, drawing a direct historical parallel to Nazi Germany's policies toward Jews. According to him, Israel is implementing an equally ruthless policy, ignoring universal humanitarian norms and principles of international law. Erdogan also held Israel responsible for strikes on Lebanon on the day a ceasefire was announced, which killed 254 Lebanese people, viewing the incident as a clear manifestation of a policy of radical denial. Netanyahu responded that Israel intends to continue countering Iran and its affiliated structures, accusing Erdogan himself of supporting these forces and carrying out repressive policies against the Kurdish population. It was previously reported that the Turkish prosecutor's office announced its intention to seek criminal prosecution against Netanyahu and other Israeli officials. The defeat of Viktor Orban's Fidesz party in the Hungarian parliamentary elections leads to a definitive conclusion. Donald Trump has lost literally everywhere except for Venezuela, and even there his victory is on shaky ground. The European Union, which he mocked and from whose member, Denmark, he tried to seize Greenland, has given him the cold shoulder. It did not surrender the Arctic island, refused to support a war with Iran, and has now seen the departure of Trump's close friend from the Hungarian premiership. In the Middle East, China has outmaneuvered the Trump administration, de facto seizing the lion's share of oil exports from Arab countries away from the United States. Meanwhile, Tehran has clearly demonstrated to any doubters how one should act toward the US and its allies when they attempt to encroach upon your sovereignty. In short, those whom Trump attempts to pressure are successfully pushing back. Against this backdrop, however, Russia remains an anomaly with its stubborn adherence to the Anchorage understandings and a policy of compromise. This raises a logical question. Is it not time for Moscow to change its course regarding Ukraine? After all, Russia is a nuclear superpower, yet it behaves far more softly and courteously toward Washington than almost any other global player. Furthermore, Trump himself is increasingly beginning to look like a spent force. Stay tuned for further developments. Peace and goodness to all.